See, a couple people just joined in since I first welcomed everybody. So I hope you all are doing well this evening. I hope the weekend has treated you kindly and you're all excited for a new week. I see a couple new names. So just to kind of give you an overview, if you are new here, welcome. Again, like I said, tonight we are going to take a look at the English portion. I do English and reading. So if you're joining in for the first time, this is an all-in-one. What this means is that we're going to take a look at part 2 of the 3 English sections that exist, and we are going to do an overview of that entire second section. So this is not a deep dive into individual topics. This is looking at what to expect from the section overall. Now, if you find that as you're working tonight that you need a little bit more in-depth look at certain topics, as we go, I will point out specific areas where you can look at with what we have with our on-demand videos. Our on-demand videos are where you can go in and hone in on specific content skills. So, this is all information that we have prepared for you with helpful QR codes. Don't worry, you don't have to snap a picture of the screen um, in a rush. I will give this to you at the end of the evening. If you do not think you will be able to hang around for the entire night, you can certainly take a picture of the screen now. However, if you are, then I will give this to you in a PDF at the end of the evening so you'll have it to refer to. But just a quick walkthrough, just in case you're new and you're not familiar. You're joining in for a live webinar. So if you are interested in any upcoming ones, we do have the schedule for January, which is just this week, and then all of February and March is starting to post as well. If you would like to go back and rewatch any of the webinars, make sure to check out this QR code. It gives you the previously recorded ones. The question bank is right here if you want to check out our Q bank. And our on-demand videos, that's what I was just talking about. Those are the in-depth look at certain topics. And you can go through, and with our timestamps, you can check those out down to the specific subject you're looking for or topic. If you are interested in tutoring, there's a QR code for that. I do the English and the reading. I would say if you are interested in tutoring, please go ahead and start looking at that calendar and getting those sessions booked. If you do not see a if you do not see a time on the calendar that works for you, that works with your schedule, please reach out to pre-nursing at Archer Review and see if we can accommodate. Now, these are two new items that we have, SurePass and SurePass Pro. So if you are looking for a discount, because who's not looking for a good discount, check these out because this is where you can discount bundles and get QBank on-demand videos, and then SurePass Pro, sorry, that was a tongue twister. SurePass Pro is where you can get a discount on everything pretty much, QBank, on-demand videos, and tutoring. So that one's really where you get your bang for your buck. So, any questions about how the night works? Any of this? Any questions? And like I said, at the end of the night, I will send you a PDF copy of this along with all the notes that we will talk about tonight. So you will get a copy of that sent. If you are on Zoom, then you'll just check the chat box. If you are on YouTube or Facebook, check your comment section. And that's where you can communicate with me as well. All right. Everybody doing good? Okay. All right. So let's take a look at what the overview tonight will focus on. How can I scan the QR code on the video? So what I would do is one of two things. You can either take a picture of this with your phone, and most phones I think now will let you actually go to the picture and you can click on the QR code you're interested in. If not, I will send a PDF of this and you can pull that up on your screen and then on a computer screen, and then you can hold your phone over it and get a copy of that. Does that help answer that question? You're welcome. All right, so tonight we are going to look at section 2 of the English, and within section 2, there are 3 subsections that we will focus on tonight. So we'll kind of pace ourselves this way. Again, if you are new, as we go through each section, we will learn a little bit, we'll do some practice, and we'll do practice questions to kind of help build your skills up, and some that will look like what you will see on the exam. So, with the first section, we're going to look at improving clarity in writing using grammar. Section 2, we'll look at determining if language fulfills the needs of an audience for given rhetorical context. And 3 focuses all about establishing a well-organized paragraph. So jumping right on in, 2.1, improving clarity in writing using grammar. Well, what does that mean? That sounds kind of scary. Well, this is just where you are going to focus on different aspects of clarity with sentence structure. That's essentially what it is. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at all the key components to being able to accomplish that for these types of questions. First off, we're going to take a look and refresh about fragments. So if it's been a while, or maybe you just have never heard of fragments before, we're going to take a look at those now. Now, when you are dealing with fragments, what you have to keep in mind that fragments exist because they are the opposite of a complete sentence. When you have a complete sentence, they are grammatically complete units. So think of a sentence as a unit. And what those units do is they are expressing a clear thought, and they are going to contain a subject, a verb, and sometimes an object. Not always an object, but sometimes. However, if you are going to have a complete sentence, you are going to have a subject and a verb. With that subject and that verb, you will express a complete thought, or the author, whoever is doing the writing, will express a complete thought. Now, as I said, that's the opposite of fragment. A fragment is going to be incomplete. So that's where you may have heard your instructors before reference to as an incomplete sentence. Some students have never heard the phrase fragment because their instructors or professors, whomever, they would reference to it as an incomplete sentence. Same thing. It's kind of like tomato, tomato. So with fragments, those are incomplete sentences. That means that those units, those sentences, are missing some element that is necessary to make up a complete sentence. And remember, to have a complete sentence, you must have a subject, verb, and express that complete thought. So a fragment is going to be missing one or multiple components to create a complete sentence. So it might just be missing a subject. So you might see a verb, you might see a thought, but it's not going to express a complete thought if it doesn't have a subject. Or you might see a subject, but not a verb. Sometimes you'll see a subject and a verb, but it's not going to express a complete thought. You're left sitting there thinking, what'd you say, Willis? Now, a couple of tips to help students for determining if what you're looking at is a fragment versus a complete sentence. Always check for the subjects and verbs because, as I have said several times now, and I'm going to keep drilling it into your head, if you have a complete sentence, you must have that subject and that verb. So you must find the subject and find the verb, and that's going to help you determine one way to help you determine if that is a complete sentence, because again, it will have a subject, a who or what the sentence is about, and it's going to have a verb. A fragment would be missing one or possibly both of these. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you need practice on finding subjects and verbs, make sure to check out those on-demand videos because we do have ones that focus in on helping you on how to find a subject, how to find a verb. But first things first, check to see if you have a subject and a verb. If you don't have one or the other, then you know right away you're looking at a fragment. Then, once you've determined if it has a subject and a verb, ask yourself, is it expressing that complete thought? So complete sentences are going to express that complete idea, that complete thought, whereas fragments will not. You want to make sure that it makes sense on its own. So if you just said it all by itself, that it communicates clearly to the reader what the intended message is. So I always tell my students that, if I were to walk up to my friend Billy Bob on the street and say, hey, blah, 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 it would be a complete thought, and Billy Bob would know what I'm talking about. So make sure you look for that complete thought. Now, another tip is to consider punctuation. Fragments might be signaled by certain punctuations, dashes, semicolons. Sometimes they'll throw a period in there. I put period because sometimes they'll throw those in there just to throw you off. So be careful, because when you're looking at answer options, even though it has a period, it's not going to necessarily mean that it's expressing a complete thought. Typically, yes, if it has a period, that means it should be rounding out a sentence. However, we know that there are trick answer options, so we want to be on the lookout for those. But complete sentences typically will end with a period, end in that complete thought, but be careful of those. Now, if you see dashes and semicolons, then you know automatically that you don't have a complete sentence. Another big tip is to watch for what we call subordination. So fragments can oftentimes occur because you have what we call a dependent clause. These are phrases that are not properly attached to an independent clause. These are incomplete. They are fragments because let me make sure I word this very clearly. So when you look at these dependent clauses, they are fragments. They will have a subject. They will have a verb. They almost look like they express a complete thought. However, if you go back to the beginning of the sentence, there's going to be something called that subordinating conjunction. That's where we get subordination from. So subordinating conjunctions. By starting the sentence off, or the clause, not sentence, excuse me, the clause off with that subordinating conjunction, what you have just done is you have eliminated the possibility of a complete thought. That is no longer going to express a complete thought. It's going to leave the reader hanging in some way or another. And we're going to take a look at that. Words like because, almost, although, since, before, after, those are very common subordinating conjunctions. When you see words like that, just be careful and ask yourself, do I have a subject? Do I have a verb? Now they will, but the most important thing is, do you have a complete thought? So again, dependent clauses will have a subject, will have a verb, because that's what makes them a clause. However, they will not express that complete thought. One thing that often helps too, last but not least, and I know in certain environments you cannot read aloud. Obviously, you can't start talking during your exam. However, if you do have that option, try reading the text aloud. So whatever it is, read it aloud, because oftentimes you can hear a fragment. You read it out loud. Sometimes when you look at it on paper, your brain just kind of glosses over it and it's like, eh. But when you force yourself to read it out loud, you hear more of that lacking, that incompleteness. Now, if you are in an environment, now don't just hang on, okay, because this is going to sound a little weird, but if you are in an environment where you cannot verbally say this out loud, okay, sometimes I have some students that are testing in a group environment. Now, what you're going to want to do, okay, hang on, is pretend like you are reading it out loud. Okay, there's a difference when you read something versus if you were to pretend you were saying it out loud. Okay, I know that sounds a little weird, but try it. Because again, like I said, when you read something just to read it, a lot of times you will see that you're just kind of glossing, you're just going through the motions, you're not fully processing what you're saying. However, if you say it out loud, or if you pretend like you're saying it out loud, then your brain has to stop and force itself to comprehend and digest what it is that you're reading. So a lot of times that will help students by either reading it out loud or pretending to read it out loud in order to determine, does it have that complete thought? All right, so any questions so far? I know I've done a lot of talking right away. Oh, I missed a comment on Facebook. Yes, we did just start. We are talking about fragments, as you probably have heard. All right, so those are some tips to help you find fragments and determine if you have a complete sentence or a fragment. Now, a few more tips for you are be mindful of questions or what we call imperative or what we call command sentences. So these can oftentimes look tricky. Questions, the subject's kind of split, but the verb is split with the subject. Sometimes with questions, you might not see a subject, but it's implied. And especially with imperative slash what we call command sentences, oftentimes those command sentences will not have a visible subject. Okay. So, for example, in questions, the subject could come after or in the middle of a verb. Can you help me with my homework? Well, in this sentence, you is the subject and can help is the verb. So it's split. Sometimes that throws students off. Like I said, with command sentences, the subject could and most of the time is implied. Bring the hot sauce. Well, in that sentence, I don't directly have a who or a what the sentence is about. Hot sauce is not the subject of that sentence. It's actually what we call the object because that's what's being brought. But who is doing the bringing? Well, it is not visibly stated within the sentence. You don't see you bring the hot sauce. Instead, that you is what we call understood. It's an implied subject. So the subject is technically there, it's just not visible, it's implied. And then the verb would be bring. So when you see those command sentences, and be careful because we're always on the lookout for a trick question or trick answer. So be careful of those because they look at first when you're just trying to look at the sentence, you're like, oh, well, I don't see a subject there. There's no subject. That's a fragment. Well, that's what they're trying to get you to think. But if you read it all the way through, and again, here's where you might want to practice reading it out loud. Bring the hot sauce. Well, who am I talking to? I'm talking to you. I'm telling you to do something. So there is actually an implied subject for that sentence. So just be careful of questions and especially those command sentences. Now, is everybody ready for some practice? Let's go through here, and I want you to see what you've absorbed, okay? Now remember, if you're on Facebook or YouTube and you can see other people's answers and they can see yours, do not worry. This is a judgment-free zone. We are all here to learn. Perfection is not expected the first time because guess what? You just learned this. So, what you're going to do is I like to see how you're doing. So, in the chat, comment section, whatever platform you're on, let's go through and I want you to tell me, is this a fragment or is this a complete sentence? Each one of these. You up to it? All right. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take about 2.5 minutes on the timer, and then you're going to tell me what each of these are. And then after that time runs out, we'll come back and check them together. Okay? All right, ready, set, and go. All right, I see a couple people still typing, so go ahead and finish up, and then we're going to check those answers. All right, I think everybody's got it. So, first off, number 1 is a fragment. It is lacking that complete thought. So, it has that subject, rain. It has that verb, stopped, but it's missing that complete thought. After the rain stopped. Well, what happened after the rain stopped? And this is an example of what I was telling you about a while ago with it starts with that subordinating conjunction. So again, if you see that subject, you see that verb, make sure to check that it does still express that complete thought. Don't just say, oh, subject verb, I'm good. Nope, we got to check to make sure we've got that complete thought. Eating ice cream on a hot day. That one's lacking a subject. Who is eating ice cream on a hot day? So that one would be a fragment as well. Number 3, she was tired because she was tired and hungry. That one again is lacking a complete thought. She is the subject, was is the verb. We're describing her as tired and hungry. But because she was tired and hungry, what? She was grouchy? We don't know. Somebody asked a great question. Could number 3 be a response? Well, yes. But oftentimes in conversational dialogue, we express ourselves with incompletes. So when you go to answer or when you go to say, so do you want me to get it? You're building off of that previous comment or question that was asked. So you're technically still kind of tagging on to what was previously said. So it's a continuation. So just be careful that in dialogue, it's like I tell my students, if you haven't already heard it, I've got a deep Southern accent. I'm going to say ain't and y'all like no other. But I tell my students, do as I tell, not as I say. I know that sounds really weird, but because of my accent, I do that. Because I've grown up with a lot of conversational. And when I'm speaking to people, out in the world, I'm not going to sit there and sweat the small stuff. I know this sounds really weird for an English instructor to say this, but I don't really sweat the small stuff. I've grown up with such, slang in my dialogue that I'll still do it, from time to time in conversation. However, when you're analyzing for grammar purposes and looking at the grammatical side of things, you do have to make sure that you have that subject, verb, and that complete thought. So, again, that's why you'll see those thrown in there because they're trying to trick you into thinking that as well. So, yeah. Number 4, running through the park and laughing. So we've got a verb, running. We've got another verb, laughing. But we don't have a subject, so therefore we don't have that complete thought. So that one's a fragment as well. Number 5, in the corner of the room. So you thought that was a response. So if I say, where is my book? And you say, in the corner of the room. But again, you're tagging it on to what was previously said. These are actually just 2 prepositional phrases that have been combined together. And there's a noun, corner. There's a room. There's another noun, room, but there's not a subject. We don't know who or what the sentence is about. What's in the corner of what room? So again, missing a subject, missing a verb, therefore missing that complete thought as well. So this one is a fragment. All 5 of these are in fact fragments. Any questions on those? That was a great question about the response. That's actually the first time anybody's asked me about that, and I'm so glad. I'm going to make a note of that to include that for the future. But any questions on those? Number 4 is park a subject, running through the park. Actually, it's not. It's a noun, but it's not the subject. See how it's in a prepositional phrase, through the park? When you have a noun in a prepositional phrase, it can never, and this is very important actually, remember this because this is something that trips people up a lot too. You cannot have a subject inside of a prepositional phrase. So, one tip that I tell students is that when it comes time to do the grammar portion, if you are not familiar with diagramming a sentence down, make sure that you familiarize yourself and you can locate and you can analyze what each word represents, what part of speech each word represents in a sentence. Because remember, in different sentences, words can act as different parts of speech. They're not always a noun, they're not always a verb. They can be different depending on the sentence. So, make sure that you can diagram a sentence and say, okay, this is a noun, this is a verb, but this is a subject, this is a verb. Make sure you can do that. And especially make sure you can identify prepositional phrases. If you need help with that, I don't mean to sound like I'm just beating a horse dead, but go back and check out those on-demand videos because that will be a lifesaver for you on not just these types of questions, but other ones when it comes to the grammar. So, subjects cannot be in prepositional phrases. So that's why park, while it could be in other sentences, it is a noun in this sentence, but it's not a subject because it's in that prepositional phrase. And also, would the park be doing the running? So the subject, is it a person? So good question. Oftentimes you would see that the subject will be a person. However, what if I say the dog is barking? That's not actually a person though, is it? But who's doing the barking? The dog. And that's an animal. Now we love our animals and we treat them like they're people sometimes, but they're not actually people. You can say my book is missing. We're talking about the book being missing, but that's not a person. So what's missing? The book. And that would be the subject of that sentence. So no, a subject is not always a person. And be careful because there are words that look like verbs, but they're actually nouns. They're what we call gerund nouns. So those are those ing. So if I say running is my favorite hobby, I'm talking about running, but I'm not actually doing the running in that sentence. So in that sentence, running is a noun and it's also acting as my subject. You're welcome. But like I said, that's one thing. If this is something that's problematic for you, if you find the grammar to be problematic, go back and refresh on being able to diagram your sentences. That might really help you in the long run. It's probably aggravating and it's not going to be your favorite thing to do. Unless you really like English like I do, I could sit there and diagram sentences all day. But then again, I'll sit there and do calculus all day too. But go back, and that is a great, great tool to have in your back pocket because it's not only going to help you with this portion of the English, but other sections as well. Because it really just brings it back down to the root of everything. Great questions tonight, you guys. Any other questions before we move on? All right. So now that we've taken a look at fragments, let's take a look at transitions and what role they play. So when you have sentences and you have multiple sentences, oftentimes you will see what we call transitions that exist between sentences or between paragraphs, and they are going to help show a movement from one thought to the next. Oops, hold on. Can I go back and explain number 2? Yes, very quickly for time's sake, but yes, I can. Oops, I've lost my mouse. There we go. All right, number 2. Eating ice cream on a hot day. So that one we're missing the subject. We don't know who's doing the eating of the ice cream. So we knew someone was eating or something was eating. We knew it was ice cream that was being eaten. We knew when it was being eaten. We just didn't know who. Was it the dog eating ice cream? I hope not. It'd probably make it sick. Or was it the little boy eating ice cream? We don't know. So number 2 was missing a subject. Now going back to transitions, when you're looking at transitions, they serve different purposes. You have some that show agreement. So this is where they're showing a continuation of ideas. And they're going to align with whatever was previously stated, whatever argument was being given, and they're reinforcing with an agreement or showing similarity. Transitions that show opposition are going to be those contrast contradictions. So they're illustrating that there's a contrast or there's a contradiction between ideas, or they can be used to show opposing viewpoints with arguments. You have some transitions that show cause. So that's going to be where you have statements demonstrating the reason behind a particular event, something that's happened. Same things or along the same lines, you have effect transitions. So these are going to show what is the result of whatever that cause was. Examples are very common. These are the more common transitions that you're going to see. But these are transitions that will introduce specific instances, certain cases. They make illustrations of whatever it is you're trying to say. So if you're trying to make a point and you want to obviously illustrate that point to your reader, you're going to give an example, hence the name example transitions. Many of you may have also seen conclusion transitions. So when you get to the end of a multi-paragraph passage, the last paragraph might start with in conclusion, therefore, in summary. Those are conclusion transitions because they're showing that we're wrapping up whatever it is we're talking about. It's marking the end. It's providing that, showing that there's about to be a summary, highlighting those, you're about to highlight the key points, but you're finalizing whatever conversation was being had. Chronology transitions, these are where you're organizing information in a chronological order. So there's a sequence of events. These again are very popular, or these also are very popular. Location transitions, be aware of those because this is showing when there is a change in physical location. It's shifting focus from one place to another. So be careful of those. Those often are very tricky and can throw readers off. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and practice. These are some like what you might see on your exam. So what I'm going to do is, again, not a deep dive or doing an overview, but we're going to see how you do with these so we know if this is something you need to come back to at a later time. So I want you to read through these sentences, and I want you to see if you can tell me exactly which would be the best transition to use based off what's being told and illustrated within that sentence. Okay? So I'm going to put about, I'm going to put about a minute on the timer. And that should be enough, but if I see we need a little bit more time, we'll add it on. All right, ready? And go. All right, looks like everybody's about done. All right, let's take a look. My mouse keeps hiding. There we go. All right, so for number 1, the correct answer was D, therefore. She studied hard for the exam, therefore she passed with flying colors. What was the result of her studying hard? She passed with flying colors. Number 2, B, however, I wanted to go to the concert last night. However, I had to finish my project first. So, even though I wanted to go on the opposing side, I had to stay home. All right. Any questions on those? Looks like everybody did pretty well. But again, remember, if you didn't get them exactly right, that's okay because we just talked about these. But now you know this is something you might want to go back in and hone in on because you might see some of these on the exam. All right, so before we move on to verbs, any questions about these and what this concept is? All right, so before we move on, just one last note. Just make sure, tip and trick, when you are looking at these, make sure you understand how the sentences, because you'll have multiple ideas, how are they being tied together? Okay. And remember, even though there are some that look like we're like, well, maybe this one could work, there's always one that's going to be the better answer, the more clear, more defined answer. Now, we briefly talked about verbs when we talked about complete versus incomplete sentences. However, for this section, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at verb tense. So, verb tense is when that verb is taking place. So, it's indicating a time in which the action or that state that's being described did occur. So 3 that you're going to see, there's actually more than this, but the 3 that we're going to focus on tonight are past tense. Obviously, that's going to be something that happened before the present moment. Okay. Oftentimes, verbs are transitioned into or changed into past tense verbs by adding on the suffix ed to that base form of the regular verb. Now, with irregular verbs, the spelling may change completely, but that's where you have to familiarize yourself with those. So, for example, she finished, ed, her homework yesterday. It took place in the past. Present tense is going to do just like it says. It's going to show that it's taking place at the present moment in time. It is occurring right now, or, now this is the one that students forget about, it's something that is what we call habitual. So it's timeless. It's going to continuously reoccur. If it's something that's continuously reoccurring every single day, then that can also be represented in the present tense. It might have happened yesterday, but it's going to happen today and it's going to happen tomorrow. So it's that continuation that shows and makes it present tense. For example, with present tense verbs, side note, with present tense verbs, you're either going to add an S or an ES for third person singular subjects and to make those verbs agree. So, for example, he reads books every evening. Well, this is something that he, whoever this he is doing every single day, every evening. Okay, so reads would be the verb tense we would use here. Now, with future tense, this is something that has not occurred yet. It's going to happen in the future, or it's expected to occur in the future, but they're not happening at the present moment. These will oftentimes be expressed with what many of you are probably familiar with called helping verbs. So this is where you will add will or shall in front of a present tense verb. So for example, they will travel to Paris next month. It's going to happen in the future. So will travel. We're adding on that will to give it that future tense. Okay. Everybody with me so far? Now, why is this important? It's important, well, for several reasons, like I said, that you be able to identify all parts of speech. But this is important to be able to identify for a couple different reasons. One of those is being that when you are given those, what I like to call vague questions or those open-ended questions where it says, review the following sentences and determine which are grammatically correct. And you're sitting there like, oh, my gee golly. I've got to sit here and check every single answer option, A, B, C, and D, and see which of these is grammatically correct. Well, guess what? In those, you want to make sure that you are looking to find that these sentences are expressing consistent, what we call consistent verb tense. That is one of those things that they might throw in there where they have an answer option that is not expressing consistent verb tense. That would make it incorrect, so therefore it's not going to be one of your answers. What we mean by consistent verb tense is that this is where no matter if it's one sentence, a paragraph, multi-paragraph, whatever, no matter what, you will keep the same verb tense throughout the paragraph, throughout the sentence, throughout the paragraph, throughout the passage. Throughout however long it is, you will keep consistent verb tense. What that boils down to is that you're saying, okay, if I start off in present tense, I'm going to stay in present tense throughout this whole paragraph. If I started off in past tense, I'm going to stay in past tense unless there's a logical reason and it is stated that you're shifting that. Remember what I talked about earlier where you're shifting time? So that would be the only logical reason to switch. But if you start off in past, you stay in past. You start off in present, you stay in present. Start off in future, guess what? You stay in future there too. This is where that clarity and coherence in your writing comes into play. This makes it easier for the reader to follow events, but just thinking about it in terms of you test taking, this is one of the things you want to check for in answer options with those that are those open-ended questions. Which of the following are grammatically correct? Take a look and make sure you find your verbs. Make sure they match. Okay? I have seen those thrown in there on rare occasions. Now, a couple tips for finding verb error or verb tense error in your sentences. I know it's probably very obvious, but yes, read the sentence carefully. Pay close attention to the verbs. So again, why do we need to be able to diagram sentences? Here's one reason. Find your verbs. Make sure that they match up with what's going on in the sentence. If they say they will travel to Paris next month, will travel is needed because when is it happening? Next month. You wouldn't say they will travel to Paris last month. That doesn't sound right. That doesn't fit the timeline. Go back, check it, make sure that it fits with what's being said in the sentence. Identify the main verb. So, make sure that you can find the main verb in a sentence. Why? Again, you might have some of those helping verbs, and that would be those future tense. Think about the context. So consider the context of the sentence. So what's the time frame? Is there a sequence of events that's being described in the sentence? Does the tense that's being used align with whatever that timeline is? Okay, like I said with the whole thing with they will travel to Paris last month, that does not fit the timeline. Take it back, rewind, and look at it again. Again, check for consistency. So make sure, find all of your verbs and make sure that they are lining up and staying consistent. Did I start off with past? Do I have another past? Did I stay with past? Throughout the whole sentence, throughout the whole paragraph, whatever, make sure that you're staying consistently in that same tense. Now, look for common errors. So this is where you want to watch out for what we call common mistakes, such as incorrect verb forms. So this is where you're mixing the past and the present. So if you see a sentence, so this kind of goes with number 4 with checking for consistency. Checking for consistency is like, oh, yep, that's present tense. Oh, yep, that's present tense. Check, check, I'm done. But make sure that you're not seeing that, oh, this is present tense, but wait, this is past tense now. If there's not a logical reason to shift, make sure that you do not have incorrect verb forms being used. Now, they will also throw in subject-verb agreement errors in these. sometimes, so make sure that you're familiar with subject-verb agreement. Consider signal words. So again, we talked about last month. So same thing with yesterday, tomorrow, now. Look for those signal words to help you with the other tips. Now, make sure, last but not least, to review for subtle shifts. Sometimes there might be a subtle shift in verb tense within a sentence, and you don't even realize it's happening. Again, this is where you have to make sure that you're breaking it down and asking yourself, okay, is this verb in past or present tense based off, look at the suffixes. Is it ed? Is it ses? What is it? Make sure that they're lining up. Now, before we do some practice, we're going to look at a couple more concepts because, again, remember, these are aimed at more of those questions with the open-end aspect. So, which of the following are grammatically correct? Well, there's a lot of different things you got to look for in those types of questions. So, we're going to take a look at a couple of those concepts. So, we talked about verb tense. Another would be diction. What is diction? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Thank you so much. So this is where you are trying to pick the right words when you're talking, when they're writing. Are they expressing the right words needed for that sentence? So this is where you want to look for words that are clear, precise, and fitting for that situation or that audience. This is important because it can oftentimes affect how the message is perceived, how it comes across, and it can ultimately affect the overall, it's kind of like the overall vibe of the sentence, if you want to think of it that way. Now, with diction errors, think of it like this. There are several different ways that diction errors can occur, okay? I know it's probably not what you wanted to hear because it's more information to remember, but there's a couple different ways. It's no set rhyme or reason like it's always going to be this. No, there's a couple different ways though. But consider your audience. Think about who will be reading this, okay? Evaluate the tone and the style. So you want to make sure that the tone and the style are matching what the sentence is trying to say. Okay, so this is where you have to think about, okay, am I supposed to be using formal language, informal language, academic, conversational, like we talked about? A big thing with diction is also making sure that the sentence does not have any ambiguity. So avoid ambiguity. What's that mean? It means that you are looking to avoid vagueness. Look for words or phrases that could be interpreted in many different ways. You want to make sure that the author is not using a word that could be taken one way by one person and another way by another person. You want something clear, direct, to the point. Another tip is to check for precision. So make sure that whatever wording that they use is getting across that intended message. So whatever the author meant to say, is that point being given? Again, this is where you want to avoid vagueness. You don't want to use overly general terms that could be misconstrued and taken a different way by a different person. On the other hand, though, make sure that you watch out for overly complex language. We do not want to overwhelm and bombard our reader with terminology and jargon that they cannot understand. So, yes, you want to be clear, but you don't want to be too detail oriented that you've kind of bypassed your reader's knowledge. You want to make sure that it's open, it's germane, that any reader, no matter their background, can understand what is being said. Another is to ensure consistency. So make sure that it's keeping that consistent terminology, that consistent language throughout. You don't want to shift halfway through. And so you're starting off in a very academic, professional tone, and then you shift to an informal, hey, what's up, halfway through. That creates confusion for the reader. It may not, may not sound like it would, but it can. Use strong verbs. So if you get a sentence where it says, I got my milk, I always tell students, I don't like that verb because it's a lazy verb. I call it a lazy verb. It's not strong. It's not descriptive. You got your milk. Well, how did you get your milk? Did you go get it from the cow? Did you go get it from the store? Did you take that bottle of milk from a baby? I hope you did not. Well, be very clear. I purchased a bottle of milk from the vending machine. Be very direct with your reader. When being direct, you want to also eliminate redundancy. You do not want to keep saying the same thing over and over and over again, but just in different ways. You want to make sure that the word choice is clear, but also that it's streamlining whatever is needed to be said. Last, but certainly not least here, consider connotations. Be mindful of connotations, other meanings that might be associated with certain words. Okay? Sometimes you'll hear like a negative connotation. You ever heard that phrase? Well, sometimes when you say certain words, it just automatically gives off a negative, bad vibe. And you don't necessarily intend that, but you have to be mindful of which words you're using based off the connotations that can be attached to them. Now, to draw on ambiguous wording, so we're going to dive into that one just a little bit more because that's, while it's part of diction, it also can be by itself, as in, when we're trying to digest those massive, wide open-ended questions. Now, like I mentioned earlier, ambiguous wording, this is where you're using words or phrases that could be understood or taken a different way depending on the reader. This is when you are using unclear pronouns, words that have multiple meanings, vague expressions, unclear sentence structure. So maybe you don't know who exactly that subject is. Remember those implied subjects? Be careful of those. A way that you don't have ambiguity or that you can avoid it is giving more context or information to the reader. So we want to look for detail-oriented sentences. You do not want to have unclear, unprecise language. You want to make sure that that point is clear and understandable by the reader. And the thing to keep in mind here is that with diction and ambiguous wording, you want to make sure that anybody that walks in off the street would understand what you're saying. That's the best way to check and make sure that you do not have a diction error or ambiguous wording. All right. Any questions on those two? I know it's a lot to digest. Diction and ambiguous wording. All right. So, a while ago we talked about fragments and complete sentences. We're going to go back a little bit more to sentence structure and we're going to look at run-on sentences. So, run-on sentences, they're a little bit different from fragments. They're not a complete sentence because what you've done here is with a fragment, you're missing information. With a run-on sentence, you have actually put together multiple complete independent clauses, but you didn't do it correctly. Okay, so it's either missing the correct punctuation or it's missing the correct punctuation and or conjunctions. So this is where essentially you've put two together and you didn't show how or why they should be put together. So a couple examples, well, an example of a run-on sentence would be if you said, "We went for a hike in the mountains. The weather was perfect for it." Well, what you've done is you've connected two independent clauses. We went for a hike in the mountains, and the second independent clause, the weather was perfect for it. Okay. So this is where we've connected two independent clauses, two complete sentences, but there's nothing there to connect them. You have to have something to connect independent clauses. Now, there are a wide variety of ways that it can be done, but we're going to go through, not that you're going to make the corrections on the exam, but you need to know what you're looking for. So if you have connected sentences correctly, it can be done by just simply putting a period and capitalizing the next word. Or short, sweet, and simple is just to put a semicolon there between the two thoughts. Another way would be if you use a subordinating conjunction and make the second independent clause into a dependent clause. So we went for a hike in the mountains. That's a complete sentence. Because the weather was perfect for it. That one's not a complete sentence now. But you can use that subordinating what? Subordinating conjunction to connect the two together. With speaking about conjunctions, you can also use what we call a coordinating conjunction. Those are going to be what you've probably heard called fanboys: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. And when you use those conjunctions, those coordinating conjunctions, you're going to put a comma in front of that coordinating conjunction. We went for a hike in the mountains, comma, and the weather was perfect for it. We put a comma before a coordinating conjunction when you are connecting two independent clauses. Now, someone just asked a great question. Wouldn't you need a comma before because? Not in this situation because since you've used the coordinating conjunction in the middle of the sentence as the connector between an independent clause that comes first, followed by now a dependent clause, no, you would not have to put a comma here. Now, if you had flipped it around and said, because the weather was perfect for it, comma, we went for a hike in the mountains. Yes, you would have to put a comma after it. Because the weather was perfect for it, comma, we went for a hike in the mountains. When the dependent clause with that subordinating conjunction comes first, a comma has to go at the end of the dependent clause before it connects to that independent clause. But when it's in the middle right here, you would not. And it also depends on when you were going through school, but when I was really, really little, they actually had it where you did put a comma, and because was recognized as a coordinating conjunction. However, sometime way back when, they got together in an English convention, I'm guessing. I don't know. I'm just making this part up. But something happened and it changed and it became a clear subordinating conjunction. And now we no longer would put the comma before it. All right. And then last but not least, you can also use what we call a transition. And you can put that right in front of it. And you would put, we went for a hike in the mountains, semicolon, in fact, comma, the weather was perfect for it. So this is where you would put a semicolon and a comma. All right. Any questions on those? Now, again, with this section and these types of questions, they're not going to say, hey, fix it. And you're going to have to retype it over. No, but you're going to have to be able to analyze, were these punctuation put in the correct place? Or is it a run-on sentence like illustrated here? All right. So now what I've done is I've put together a practice of everything we've talked about in this first section. I've got two sentences here. I mean, two sentences, heavens. Two questions here. And then we've got some more on the next page. But I want you to do these two first. I'm going to put a minute and I'm going to put a minute and a half on the timer. And then we're going to come back and check these two, okay? All right, ready, set, and go. All right, everybody ready? All right, let's take a look. So for the first one, which of the following is a sentence fragment? So going through those, you would see that D, once I go to the bookstore and the library to get the books I need, that is in fact a fragment. Drop that fork is a command, so it's still a complete sentence even though it's got an implied subject. B, did you bring the essay for review? That's a question, so the subject is there. It splits the verb did and bring, so you is my subject. Depending on the weather, we will walk. This is actually a complex sentence. It's got a dependent clause at the start. And nope, not a dependent clause. I'm sorry. It's got an introductory phrase, so it's not a complex sentence. It's just a sentence, a simple sentence with an introductory phrase. Depending on the weather, but we will walk. We is the subject, will walk is the verb. Once I go to the bookstore and the library and to get the books I need, that is a fragment. We don't know what's going on after that. Number 2, which of the following transition words or phrases best completes the sentence? So this one would be therefore, D. So D and D. All right, looks like everybody did well on those. Any questions on those? Could 2B be? Consequently, the weather forecast predicts rain tomorrow. Consequently, we should bring umbrellas. While that one does initially sound like it would work, consequently, though, you have to think about we should bring umbrellas. Is that necessarily a consequence? Think of the negative connotation that's attached to that. So, is it negative? Now, if the sentence had said, the weather forecasted rain today, consequently, I left my umbrella at home. Wouldn't you leaving your umbrella at home have that negative since it's been forecasted that the rain would be all day today? So consequently has that negative attachment to it. So that's where you're looking at like the negative side effect of something or outcome. Does that make sense? You're welcome. All right, so if you're up for some more practice, let's do these 3 questions. I'm going to put a minute and a half on the timer as well for this one, just to see how you do. If you still need a little bit more time, that's fine. I'll adjust it, but let's just see how we're doing with our timing, okay? All right, so do all 3 of these, a minute and a half on the timer now. Ready? And go. See a couple people still answering, so take about 30 more seconds and then we'll check them. All right, let's go through and check. So, with number 1, this one was A. There was a subject-verb agreement error. We briefly touched on this when we were talking about verbs, and verb tense. So, be careful of those. This is where I mentioned also a while back about of the players. Players cannot be your subject because it is inside of a prepositional phrase. Each and change are representing two different things. Each is singular, change is plural, and so therefore you've got a subject verb agreement error. So number 1 was A. The verb tense was fine because is was actually the only verb. Diction was fine. Ambiguous wording, everything was pretty straightforward with the words they picked. Number 2, which of the following words in the above sentence, well, it was below, sorry, is an example of ambiguous language? So which one's unclear? Well, committee's pretty straightforward. It's a group of people. Study, again, straightforward because it's talking about the act of. And then issue, C, that would be the vague word. And remember, ambiguous is vague. What is the issue? They decided to study the issue. What issue? Global warming. You know, penguins versus puffers. What? Decided, that one's a straightforward verb. So issue was the unclear word in that sentence. So that one was C. Number 3, which of the following is a complete sentence? So before we looked at what was a fragment, this one we're looking for complete. This one's a trick. It's the shortest one, but wait for the bus is actually a complete sentence. Who's waiting for the bus? I'm telling you to wait for the bus. So it's an implied subject. That's that command sentence. A is a fragment running through the forest. No subject, no verb. Well, verb, I'm sorry, yes, it's they are running, but it doesn't have the complete thought. The book on the table by the window. Book is my subject, but I don't have a verb, and so it does not express a complete thought. While she danced gracefully. So she is our subject. Danced is a verb. However, it starts with that subordinate conjunction while. While she danced gracefully, what? You know? My twin sister, while she danced gracefully, her sister was tripping and falling. What? We don't know. So D is the correct answer. Any questions about any of those? Looks like we were doing pretty good. Now, I would say if you missed number 1 and you're still a little stuck on subject-verb agreement, again, diagramming your sentences will definitely help you with that. But also make sure to check out the on-demand videos because there's a section all about subjects and verbs. All right, everybody doing okay? All right, so 2.2, we are moving on to our second section for the evening. So determine if language fulfills the needs of an audience for a given rhetorical context. My, what a mouthful. Well, what this just means is that we're going to take a look at what's going on in sentences and how we got there. So first things first that we're going to talk about with this section is setting and situation. So a couple things about this section too is that you really must know your terminology. I'm a big believer in terminology in general. If this is not your first rodeo with me, you have heard me sit here and preach to the choir about how I think terminology and knowledge of terminology is so important for students. Oftentimes, it's not that students don't understand the concept of what's being asked in a question, it's just that they don't understand the wording of a question. So, terminology is very important. So, you need to be able to determine the narrator's setting or the situation that's occurring. So, first things first, what genre is the writing? Is it fiction? Is it nonfiction? Okay. What's the author's purpose? The big question you want to ask here to get that answer is, why did the author write this? That leads you to, why is it being written? So those two kind of go hand in hand. What is the setting? Where is it taking place? So setting is where the story is taking place. Once you know that, you need to ask yourself, who is the intended audience? Who is this being written for? Is it being written for a group of college students? Is it being written for, a political rally? Is the author using formal or informal language? So is it very academic or is it informal? Or is it just proper formal? What is the tone? That means the attitude. Your mom always said it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Well, there you go. What's the tone? Is it serious? Is it mocking? Is it sarcastic? Is it sad? Is it moving? Lots of ranges of emotions that can be here. Now, I'm not going to read through every single word on this page. This is for your benefit to take with you. So when I send you this PDF at the end of the night, you'll have this to study the terminology on. So a couple things I am going to hit high points on here. Genre, that's just what category is it falling in. So what classification, what category. Colloquialism. This is a big one that you want to make sure that you pay attention to for a couple different reasons. There's a couple different types of questions that this can be applied to. So this is where you get colloquialism is informal words, phrases. This is that everyday language I mentioned a while back, actually. So these can change based off of different regions. So as I mentioned earlier about, I have a deep Southern accent. My boss at my dean at my college, she gets a hoot and a holler out of it when I say, "Oh, that just burns my biscuits." That's a phrase that's very popular. Well, it's not too popular, I guess, but that's just how deep Southern I am. Let's see. It depends on where you live at. Now, let's take a poll really quick. How many of you, if you were sitting here and you were drinking a Coca-Cola, or a Diet Coke, Crispy DC as they call it, what would you call it? Would you call it a soda? Would you call it a pop? What would you call it from where you're from? You don't have to tell me where you're from, but just what would you call it? A Coke? But now, when you say Coke, does that apply to if it was just a Coca-Cola, like a Coke, or would you like any brand? You would call it a Coke. Oh, okay. So you'd call a Pepsi a Coke. That's offensive in the South, actually. Did you know that? Pepsi is gross. Soda, soft drink. Yep, some people just call it soft drink. Yep. Yep. So that can vary depending on the region. And again, this can be it can vary on the region. It can even vary between social groups. So this could be something where it's very popular with formal versus informal type questions. Again, setting, author's purpose, audience, formal language versus informal language, author's register. This is just the vocabulary, the tone, things like that. And then jargon, if you're not familiar with that terminology, that's just the way special words that people would use depending on if it's a particular profession, a field, a different community. A Coke. Yeah. But yes, so again, I'm not going to read every single one. This is just so you have this sheet for your records. Now, let's dive in just a little bit. We can't go too far in depth with it, but let's look at formal versus informal. Now, when you think of formal versus informal, formal would be when you're looking at academic essays, business reports, formal letters. Informal writing is if you send a text message to somebody or a personal email. Now, remember, there's emails that you send to your boss, and then there's emails that you send to your best friend. You would definitely word those differently, wouldn't you? Yeah. And then social media posts. So those would typically be informal. Gender bias. This is a big one that you might see in questions. So, what does that mean with gender bias? Well, this is where you want to be careful what words are being used because you don't want to highlight one gender over the other. So, it's kind of like you're being politically correct, you know how people say. Now, we're not going to get into the politics of it all, okay? So, we're not going to go into any in-depth heated discussions here, okay? We're only looking at it as far as it applies to the exam. But for example, gender bias. If a sentence said, the environmentalists pointed out the detrimental effects of man-made pollution on the delicate ecosystem of the river, well, you just used a word that was gender bias, man-made. So you're telling me that only men are out there in the world making pollution. No, we cannot blame men for all of the pollution in the world. Okay. So instead, it should have said something like the environmentalists pointed out the detrimental effects of human made pollution on the delicate ecosystem of the river. So, again, if you have those open ended questions, be on the lookout for gender bias. Okay, that's something you would want to avoid. A lot of people are not familiar with gender bias words, or they don't realize that certain words are gender bias. So I've got a couple of them. These are definitely not all of them, but I've got a couple of them highlighted for you. So, did you know? Fireman, we don't do that because women can be fire people too. So, you would say firefighter instead of fireman. I mean, have you turned on ABC? They have a whole show and that's got women all everywhere. What's that show called? Oh, it's the spinoff of Grey's Anatomy. And then the other channel, is it Fox or NBC? They've got Chicago Fire. They got women up there. Mm-hmm. Same thing with policeman. We don't do that. No. It's a police officer. Could be a man. Could be a woman. You don't know. Who's going to walk up to your car and give you a ticket? Chairman. Well, you know what? Ladies can do it too. So it's a chairperson. Or they actually will just say a chair now. Yep. Stewardess. We don't do that anymore because there are men that work on airplanes as well, and they are called flight attendants. Actress, actually, this isn't used interchangeably, but a lot of times you'll hear actor and actresses, but now they actually will just call actors for males and females. So, Brad Pitt is an actor, but um Jennifer Aniston is an actor as well. So they just call them actors. They don't even really use actress anymore. Or not that much. Not in politically correct. Non-gender bias. Businessman is business person, or better yet, they call you an entrepreneur. The Academy still uses it for Oscars categories. Yes, they do. But that's because they're trying to be very distinct between men versus women. But if you're trying not to show gender bias, you can use actor. For this, at least. Mailman, women can do it too. So, mail carrier or postal worker, salesman is now salesperson. And there's, like I said, this is not half of them, to say the least. But this is just to get you an idea of them. All right, so we are at our practice. 2.2 goes really fast because it's really just an overview of terminology. So, what you're going to do is I'm going to put 2 minutes on the timer just because this one are a little bit more. I'm also going to zoom in a little smidgeroony. Ew, can I get it? Yes. There. Okay. All right, so I'm going to put 2 minutes on the timer, and then we're going to come back and check. Ready? Steady. Don't fall. Go. Okie dokie. Artichokes. Are you ready? Looks like it. All right, so I'm going to zoom back out just a little bit. Here we go. Number 1. Which of the following publications would most likely contain the sentence below? So this is where we're trying to think about, okay, where would we see this at? In the distance, Joan watched as the boat sailed across the glistening water with all of its hopes of a happy life, and with it, all of its hopes of a happy life drifted away. Oh, with it, that was very redundant. So we wouldn't really see that in a scientific journal. Literary work, yes, because look at how descriptive it is. Definitely not a business memo. Maybe a motivational. Oh, heavens to Betsy. But if it's motivational, I've had students ask me this before, so just in case you were wondering, would it be motivational to talk about somebody who's watching their hopes and dreams disappear? No, 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 no. Number 2, which of the following sentences contains informal language? So totally awesome, blew everyone away. That would be informal. Now, I would say B, incredibly impressive. Incredibly is borderline, technically slang, but totally awesome. I mean, hello, bring it on. That one's definitely not formal language. Now, number 3, this is typically the most problematic for most of my students that I work with, because they just forget to think about and study on different times and the slangs that's used during different times. So let's go through and just kind of highlight. So A, and this is a little tip if you struggled with this one. I like to think about history lesson. Now I have a history degree and I am a history major, so I enjoy thinking back on these times. But this is where you have to kind of think about, okay, what was happening during these periods. So you know, like the 20s, you got the Roaring 20s, the 30s, you got the Depression, the 40s, the war, 50s, they're coming out of the war. The 60s is like, you know, hippies love. 70s were full swing hippie love. 80s we're moving into rock, grunge. 90s it's, you know, kind of that I don't know how to describe it. And then 2000s it's completely just wilding out. So, A, we're all going to the juke joint after work to hear the noon band play. Based off of these A, B, C, D, this would be the most likely thing you would hear during the 30s. The 5 finger discount, that came about into the 90s. Didn't know what a juke joint was until I just looked it up. So, jukeboxes, yeah, they were pretty popular in the 50s, but they did start calling them juke joints because that's where the bands would play. And then you get the juke boxes when you just would listen to the music on the machines. 5 finger discount, that's actually from the 90s. That would be considered because that's when that came about. The store manager called the popo on him when they caught him stealing that paper. That would be from the 2000s. Hey man, you're harshing my good vibes. We're all cool cats around these parts. So that'd be like 60s, 70s. So, yep. Now I would say I don't see too many of these types of questions, but I have seen a couple. And I've had some students tell me that they've seen them a couple times. So just be prepared. And again, I would go, I mean, I know this sounds terrible, but I just went to Google. When I was preparing for my test, I went to Google and I typed in give me different popular phrases from different eras, and that's what I did to study. And I made a chart. I do remember that. I made a chart. All right, so with this second part of the practice for this section, read this paragraph, and I want you to tell me which of the following sentences uses language that fits that style. Okay? I'm gonna put a minute and a half on the timer just to give you time to read it, and then we will come back and check. Okay? Ready? Set. Go. All right, I see a couple people still typing, so take about 15 seconds. All right, let's take a look. So this one would have been B. Furthermore, having fluidity from one paragraph to the next using transition words can create a clear structure to your writing. A, that one wouldn't be appropriate because as you read throughout the passage, you get that formal academic tone. Authors jumping from one idea to the other can give them whiplash. That's slang, that's informal. We wouldn't want to use that. C, writers who maintain clear structure within their writing are less likely to lose their train of thought when writing. This one starts off looking pretty good, but however, I mean, not but however, ugh, I just can't even stop myself from saying it. Anyways, so where it kind of goes off track is when it says lose their train of thought. A lot of people don't actually realize that that too is informal wording, so we wouldn't use that one as an answer option. Definitely not D because writing this way is the dopest way to bang out this job. That's informal if I haven't ever heard it. Okay. So A, C, and D all in some way or another express informal language. So B is the only one that shows true formal academic tone throughout. All right. Any questions on that one? Now, if you put C, no, I'm not going to call anybody out, but if you put C, did you even think about the fact that train of thought was technically informal? No. So now you know, just be careful. Even that minor wording right there can eliminate an answer option. All right, so that brings us to the end of 2.2. So we are rounding out our third and final section. So this is where you are focusing on well-organized paragraphs. Now, again, I have said it once tonight. I have said it many times in my life, and I will always stand by. You need to know the terminology. So for this section, you really need to make sure that you understand and can identify the different parts of a paragraph. Okay. So now again, I'm not going to sit here and read all this word for word. This is for you to keep for your notes. But topic sentences. If you have a paragraph, you are going to have a topic sentence. Now, if it is a singular paragraph all by itself, oftentimes that's where you're going to be introduced to the main idea. That can often be seen as a main idea sentence. Okay. If it's a multi-paragraph passage, that's a topic sentence. The main idea is going to be in a different paragraph because it's summarizing the entire passage. So it really just depends on if it's a singular paragraph versus a multi-paragraph passage. But regardless, paragraphs need to have a topic sentence. This is where it's pulling focus for what that paragraph is about. Okay. After you have your topic sentence, you need to have your supporting sentences that can back up or give evidence, provide examples, whatever of what that main idea of that passage is, that paragraph is about. And then last but definitely not least, don't forget about conclusion paragraphs. Nope. Scratch that. Conclusion sentences. Yes, in multi-paragraph passages, you have a conclusion paragraph, but within a paragraph itself, you also have a conclusion sentence. A lot of my students, when we're writing for freshman comp, they don't even realize this and they often forget to include it in their paragraphs. So when you have a paragraph, you start off with your topic, you have your supporting details, but you don't just want to end on examples. You want to round out that paragraph in some way. And that's where that concluding sentence comes into play. Now, earlier, we talked about transition words. This is where those are going to come back up again. So, topic sentences, this is a whole bunch of terminology for you that I'm going to summarize. Topic sentences, they typically will start your paragraph. Chronological order paragraphs are going to show things that happen in a time order. Spatial, this is depending on the physical location. Order of importance, that's when you present things based off of how important they are. So some things are more important than another, so they come first, and then you move to the least important. Cause and effect paragraphs, this is when you're showing a cause and or an effect of something. Compare contrast, same thing. It's either showing compare and or contrast. Problem and solution, these are starting to become more popular. So they present a problem, then they provide you with the solutions. Or they can do vice versa. They can present the solutions and then provide the problem or illustrate the problem. General to specific, so that's where you have paragraphs that start off pretty broad and then go very narrow. Thematic order, so this is where paragraphs are relatable based off themes or concepts. And then transition words and phrases, those are used between paragraphs and between sentences. So remember, you can have transitional words in between sentences to show the movement of one idea to the next in sentences, but also when you work with multi-paragraph passages, you can have them to show movement from one paragraph to the next. Now, when you are reading a paragraph or a multi-paragraph passage, you want to make sure that you are not missing any key information. In order to do so, you need to do a couple of things. One, I know it probably sounds very obvious, but we're going to say it. Understand the context. So you need to make sure to familiarize yourself with whatever. Now, familiarize yourself does not mean you're going to go home and study right now for every single subject that could be presented under the sun. No, when you get your paragraph, when you're taking your test and you get your paragraph, familiarize yourself based off what you're reading. Okay? What is the overall context of what that paragraph is trying to say? So to do that, look at your paragraph, determine what the topic is, find the purpose. So why did the author write this? And then who is this written for? Who's that intended audience? That's how you can understand the context. Make sure that you can identify key points. So if it's a single paragraph or multi-paragraph passage, make sure that you can, one, find the main idea. And then from there, what are the key points? What are those specific examples, arguments, points, whatever, that are being used to back up and elaborate on that main idea? That's what a key point is. Then you want to check for inconsistencies. So look where there might be things that are not consistent or they're not explained consistently throughout the paragraph or the passage. Or if there's any contradictions. Did they say one thing, but then they turn around and said another? Well, if you see a contradiction, that's going to be like a little red flag that there's some missing information or it's just not worded very well. Look for any unanswered questions. So if you find that you're reading and you come up with questions yourself as the reader, don't doubt that instinct. That's oftentimes a bad mistake that students will make. And I don't like to say bad, but it is. Don't doubt yourself. You know, when you're reading something, guess what? You're probably not an expert on every single topic that they're going to present to you. And that can work in your favor. A lot of times students will get overwhelmed because they sit there and think, oh, well, I don't know a lot about this subject on what I'm reading about in this paragraph. That actually can be a good thing. Embrace that. Don't let it overwhelm you. Okay? Because by not being an expert, you don't understand it. And by not understanding it, you need to have it explained to you in what? In great detail. So when those details are missing, when those explanations are missing, you're more likely to pick up on that and be able to identify any of those unanswered questions or what it leads to, that missing information. So again, don't let your anxiety get the best of you here. Okay? Not being a topic expert can actually work in your favor. Look for supporting evidence. So this is where you want to look at what are those supporting details? What examples are being provided to support that main idea? If there are any gaps, again, this is where not being a topic expert helps you out. If there are any gaps in that evidence, that typically will indicate that there's some missing information somewhere. And that's where you want to look to see where those gaps are. And that's where the information is missing from. Now, think about it though, even though you're not a topic expert, think about what are some logical connections. So, how does it logically flow from one thought to the next? If you see something missing, again, don't doubt yourself. It probably is. All right. So, what we're going to do is we're going to practice. We're just going to go jump right on into practice. So, I want you to take a look at this. I'm going to put about 45 seconds on my timer, and then we're going to come back and check. Ready? And go. All right, everybody ready? All right, let's take a look. So, for this one, which of the following examples would most likely act as a transition sentence? So, we're trying to show movement from one idea to the next. So, for this one, D, additionally, there's that transition word. Additionally, we're showing that we're adding on to something that was expressed. Daily physical education courses offer students an opportunity to develop positive habits that can extend the entirety of their lives. Now, C, if you selected C, there are many reasons why physical education should be a required daily course for students in each grade. This would actually be a topic sentence, so that would not be a transition one. The key there is that it's saying many reasons. Well, that means that that paragraph is going to illustrate and give those many different reasons. One of those being that daily physical education courses offer them the opportunity to develop positive habits. A is actually a supporting detail sentence, but there's not a transition word used in that sentence to illustrate that it was moving from one idea to another. B is actually what we would call an introductory detail. All right, any questions on that one? All right, let's try this one. I'm going to put 45 seconds on the timer since that seemed to work pretty well. And then we'll come back and check. Ready, set, go. All right. I see a couple people still typing on this one, so take about 10 seconds and then we'll check. All right, let's take a look. So for this one, C. Looks like a lot of people did well on that one. But let's take a look. Which of the following sentence contains information that does not belong in the paragraph? So when composing an email, opting for an informal approach is acceptable given its direct addressee. All right, any questions? All right, let's take a look at this one, see how you do. Number 3. This one's, you have to reorder. So A, B, C, D, move them around and put them in the correct order with the letters. Ready, set, and go. All right, ready? Let's take a look. So C, B, D, A. Any questions on those? Sorry, I went too far. All right, well, that actually is all of our practice for tonight. I hope you found this helpful. Again, if there are any areas that you feel like you need a little bit more work on, make sure to check out the on-demand videos to get that guidance, the Q Bank to get that practice, because there's a lot of in-depth practice questions there. And then you can always go back and rewatch. All right. So you guys hold tight for just 1 second. I'm going to get the notes for you. Sorry, I have to get the PDF file. It's not right. All right. Give me one more second. If you are on Zoom, check your chat box now for a PDF link. If you're on Facebook or YouTube, check your comment section for a link. Awesome. All right, so now you've got the notes from tonight. Like I said, I've attached these, actually attached them at the beginning and the end of your slides. So you've got all the QR codes. You can open this up on your computer and then use your phone to scan them. If you're on your phone, take a screenshot, and then I know at least with my phone, I can go in and actually click on the QR code from the picture. And if you need us, reach out to us. We've got our Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and if you have any questions, like I said, if you are interested in tutoring, and I know for at least with my schedule, for example, if you don't see something posted that works with your schedule, please reach out to pre-nursing and we can see if we can accommodate you. Well, I'll see if I can accommodate you because I'm always happy to see what I can fit in my schedule. SurePass and SurePass Pro, if you are interested in those, then there's a little sheet with further information. And then again, if you want any tutoring, there's me, Shelly, and Brandon Craft Math. All right. And if you have time when you're looking over your slides, if you'll take the survey, we greatly appreciate it. All right, so that's it for tonight. I'll be back on Wednesday night with reading. Join me then. If not, I hope you guys have a great week. I hope to see you Wednesday, but if not, have a great week. I'm going to stick around for a couple more minutes in case anybody has any questions, last minute questions. But if not, I'll hopefully see y'all Wednesday. Yep, see you Wednesday. All right. Well, you guys have a great night.